here, there are 2 or 3 compounds. This is the way we separated originally the compounds from cannabis. But that was many, many, many years ago. We separated about 10 or 12 compounds, and these compounds included the only one active compound. Active, we tested at that time in monkeys. I had a colleague who worked in a nearby institute, and he had a colony of monkeys, and he and his group indeed tested these compounds in monkeys, and surprisingly found that only one compound did anything in these monkeys. It sedated them. They didn't sleep, but they were sedated. On the basis of this particular observation, we decided there is just one active compound, and surprisingly this is true to this very day. There is only one major active compound, which is named now delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol THC, and this compound causes essentially all the hashish type, cannabis type effects that we know so well. Cannabis was used in the Middle East for thousands of years.
As medicine?
Who knows, maybe for other things as well. Many of the tribes at the time used cannabis. Assyrians used it for medicine, used it for excitation, as used it in religion. The Egyptians used it as medicine. Surprisingly, the Greeks and the Romans didn't know about psychoactivity, but they used cannabis as anti-inflammatory drug. Cannabis in India was used by people who want to be delivered from all worries and care. Well, that's quite a good definition of anti-anxiety. We knew that cannabis had been used for epilepsy.
In the past?
In the past. There is, for example, a translation of Arab story of the 15th century, and it says that one of the Arab leaders had epilepsy. Physician came over and gave him cannabis, and it cured the mechanism. A group in the US, Professor Aline Howlett, she was a young researcher at that time in St. Louis.
I really didn't know very much at all about marijuana or cannabinoids. That wasn't my area of expertise. In the United States, we need DEA approval to get cannabinoid drugs for research. So I got through the approval. I got some delta-9 THC and did these studies and found some very interesting things.
Dr. Howlett found in the brain a specific receptor for THC. It was named the CB1 receptor, cannabinoid receptor number 1.
Now that was a major discovery in the mid-80s. So here we had, for the first time, an indication that THC acts on a receptor.
So that was the first momentous discovery, and then once it was discovered that there are receptors, then the next obvious question is, why are there receptors in the human brain for a smoke substance? How did God know that his creations will smoke marijuana?
Receptors are made for compounds that we produce, not because there is a plant out there.
And the answer, obviously, was that it's not for marijuana. There are some compounds in the body itself which mimic marijuana.
So we went ahead looking for endogenous compounds. We looked for a good name, and although some people do not agree with me, but in Hebrew there are not too many names for happiness. For sorrow you can find a lot of names, but for happiness, not for extreme happiness. We've looked into Assyrian things, but Assyrian things are more complicated. They call cannabis with apparently a lot of THC, they call it ganzigunu. Well, call the compound ganzigunu was too complicated. So we decided we'll go to something else.
I remember actually discussing the naming of this. I think it was Bill Devane who came up with the name. Is that right?
Right.
Rafi Musulam and Roger Pertwee and myself were all sitting outside
in the sun, overlooking a nice little river. And 2 years before, I said to Rafi, if I isolate this chemical, I get to name it, don't I?
Bill was interested in these Sanskrit stories, and he found that Ananda is bliss delight.
People who know me know that I study Eastern philosophy, and I know lots of Sanskrit words, you know.
Ananda means in Sanskrit supreme joy.
Professor Meshulam said, you know, it can be a good, it will be a part just on chemical nature of this compound, and because it's ethanol amide. So we did Ananda and amide, so it's anandamide.
Even in the print form of a dictionary, the Collins Unabridged English Dictionary, and I bought one for my sister and gave it to her, and it's in the dictionary. Anandamide. Anandamide. Yeah.
They made this discovery and published in this landmark paper, and its importance is illustrated very well by the fact that it's one of the very few papers in the biomedical literature that has been cited over 2,000 times since its publication.
They even don't cite it anymore because it's considered such a well-known thing, an obvious thing, that they don't even cite our work anymore. They mention anandamide does A and B and C. It turned out that there is a whole system in the body which is involved around anandamide, and this in many respects parallels important systems that the body relies upon them. And this system is called now the endocannabinoid system, and a huge number of researchers are involved in investigating this system from many aspects.
So in 1995, you had an idea of testing THC on children.
It has been known for many years that cannabis can lower the effects of anti-cancer drugs. Anti-cancer drugs, many of them, cause terrible side effects. And in children, unfortunately, children get cancer as well. Children vomit and want to vomit, have nausea. They're really in a bad shape. And they cry all the time. And their parents are in a bad shape. Luckily, most of the children can be cured of the cancer. But the treatment is absolutely difficult. We wanted to do a clinical trial in children. We did that with Professor Aya Avramov. She was head of the Department of Pediatric Oncology in one of the Jerusalem hospitals. And we did a major study with THC given in oily drops under the tongue of children. Obviously, children cannot smoke. We had children that were not even 1 year old. We dropped, or she dropped, THC in oil, in olive oil, under the tongue, 2 or 3 times a day, small doses, during the anti-cancer treatment. At the beginning, we wanted to do a double-blind study. Some of the children got the THC, some other children got only the olive oil. After a week, she told me, I'm not going ahead with that. I know exactly who is getting the THC. I know exactly who is not getting it. There was a complete separation. Those that didn't get it continued to vomit. So she went ahead doing an open study, and she gave THC, pure THC, under the tongue about 400 times, which means that those that were involved in the experiment got it every time they were treated with whatever they were being treated. And at the end, we saw that we had complete block of vomiting, complete block of nausea by small amount of THC, which did not cause any psychoactivity, nothing. So here we had a complete therapeutic effect. And we published that, and again, essentially nothing happened. Finito, that was it. It's still not being used in children.
And you think it's a good idea to use it for children?
Well, I believe it's an excellent idea because we help those children that suffer. But I have no influence on oncologists.
If there is a cancer patient who's got pain and that pain is not being controlled well by other kinds of drugs, they're on cancer chemotherapy, they're vomiting, I think it's unethical to withhold a drug from them that can be very useful to help them in their pain management and in their ability to cope with their disease.
In about 1999, he came up with a concept with Dr. Ben Shabbat of the entourage effect, the idea that there were many compounds, endogenous cannabinoids, some seemingly inactive on their own, but together they make this beautiful music. They create an entourage effect that greatly increases activity.
Rafi basically spoke to me about this entourage idea, and he made a very nice comparison, you know, like politicians, if they go alone to places, nobody pays them any importance. If they go accompanied by perhaps less active components, just the fact that the politician or the minister or the president is accompanied by many people makes it more important. So this is the entourage effect.
I feel that the same applies to the components of the cannabis plant itself. And so many of these are what are called minor cannabinoids, contribute to an overall effect that you cannot produce with a single molecule. This has been a key concept in what the work I've tried to do under his influence.
I was convinced that one should only test pure compounds with one target, whereas it's the combination sometimes of the compounds that can do the trick.
A very serious group of researchers has recently published a paper saying that the endocannabinoid system is involved in essentially all human diseases.
If you combine CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors, they cover most of the organism, at least in mammals.
We are mammals.
We are mammals.
Okay.
But when you talk of mammals, you talk of horses and dogs and mice and rats and rabbits and lions and...
We all share the endocannabinoid system.
I believe so. I believe so. And it has been demonstrated in many species.
Because now suddenly everyone has cannabis in their bodies, or everyone has a cannabinoid in their bodies, so it can't be bad.
These molecules that we all have are so critical from the birth to the death of each of us in health and disease.
He suggested that endocannabinoids in the milk of mothers actually may contribute to the hedonic effects of the milk. And it turned out to be almost true, actually. So he has a great vision. And then I know that he suggested to Itai Bab that he should look at the bone. Why would anybody in the world, actually, without preconception, look at bone?
Ah, so you do have a laboratory here.
You've been here. We have discovered the skeletal endocannabinoid system. These are osteoclast cultures. Osteoclasts are cells that break down bone.
Okay.
So she's analyzing the effect of cannabinoids on the number of osteoclasts. This is the growth engine, which is similar in mice and humans. You see here the brown cells, these are CB1 receptors, these are C receptors in the engine.
We've got a lot of research now going on because now we know there are CB1 and CB2 receptors in those kinds of cells that either help degrade the bone or help rebuild the bone. In this day and age, people are living, women beyond menopause, men well into old age, and we're going to have to think about how to preserve those bones so they can last another 40 years after menopause.
When a woman becomes pregnant, basically the body should get rid of the embryo because the embryo, to a certain extent, 50%, comes from a different organism from the father. The body doesn't do that. We don't know why the body doesn't do that. It's kind of a lowering of the immune system, certainly around the embryo. And it seems, it's quite possible, that the endocannabinoid system, in a wide sense of meaning, may be involved in prevention of this kind of immune effect, which is the basis of our life. I mean, obviously, if the embryo is kicked out, there's going to be no life on this planet.
Acatamiento y veneración a la doctrina de vuestros maestros y predecesores.
In Israel, I got the Israel Prize, the Rothschild Prize, other prizes, got important prizes in Germany. Now, they didn't know anything about marijuana, and the only thing that they actually knew was that a young person from the Middle East had asked for a grant and was working on it. So, pharmacologists came over and asked me, are you still working? I said, yes, we had just identified the active compound, and we had a large amount of the active stuff there. We had about 10 grams of THC. So he said, please give us the 10 grams and we'll do a lot of pharmacology in the US. So he got the world supply of THC. Nobody had THC at that time. Got the world supply of THC, took it to the US. Actually, he probably smuggled it because I don't think that he had a license so he could take it to the US. But then, of course, nobody was looking for THC. It was not a known compound. So he took it to NIH. And for the next couple of years, most of the research in the US on THC was done with material supplied by us, those grams that they took. And for many years, nearly 40, 45 years, I was supported financially by the National Institute of Health. And they never interfered. He's a major researcher in Spain. He has worked on the mechanisms through which cannabinoids act on cancer.
In our hands, classical cannabinoids are the ones that work best, by large, in inducing cell death in cancer cells.
THC comes from cannabis or comes from synthetic?
THC coming from cannabis. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's THC, the real THC. Now we know that cannabinoids can exert anti-tumor actions in animals, not only in brain tumors, but in many different types of tumors. We know that cannabinoids act not only by inducing cell death through that specific mechanism called apoptosis, but we know that cannabinoids can tackle other processes of cancer cell growth, such as angiogenesis, metastasis, cell cycle, etc.
He even did a small clinical trial.
We did a trial with 9 volunteers that had a very malignant form of brain cancer, glioblastoma multiforme, and we observed some positive effects of cannabinoids in survival of the patients and also on tumor growth, based both on imaging techniques, magnetic resonance imaging, and also based on the measurement of some biomarkers of tumor progression.
Though we have done quite a lot in the field of cannabinoids and endocannabinoids, we have not done enough in clinical trials. This is something that has to be done. If this is not done, we will certainly miss a lot and we will not be helping human patients. It should be done. At one point, somebody decided that it is worthwhile testing cannabis with relatively high doses of THC, I believe, in people that are Alzheimer or Alzheimer-like patients. They got it in their food in the yogurt or whatever. Some of them, I believe, not all of them, but some of them were in a better shape. Some of them started speaking, their eyes became brighter. In one case, an ex-writer started writing again. In another case, a woman said, "I feel fine," and went home. So it seems to be helping the symptoms of Alzheimer or senility. Alzheimer at the moment is a huge problem, and there is very little that can be done for Alzheimer patients. So maybe if it is well researched in the future, we should know how to help these patients. We're dealing here with a population of millions, and this population will grow because in most countries, Western countries at least, the number of older people is growing all the time. We are lucky that cannabis is not toxic. People do not die from overdose of cannabis.
Most appropriately for a cannabinoid meeting, we're ending on a high, really, in the form of a talk by Rafi Meshulam, who's of course the father of modern cannabinoid research, no doubt about that.
And I would like to end with something that's really crazy speculation. Each one of us has a different personality, and we have no idea why. Why do we have different personalities? Well, part of it is the effect of the environment, okay? But part of it is genetic, and we don't know why we have different personalities. One way of explaining it is there are several hundred compounds, endocannabinoid-like compounds. They are like anandamide in their chemical structure that are present in the brain, and it is quite possible that each one of us has a different, slightly different level of these compounds. This is genetic. This is based on the different DNA of everybody, but DNA doesn't affect the personality. It is the compounds that are formed from DNA through RNA to proteins and peptides and secondary compounds. So it is quite possible that differences in the endocannabinoid system and the cannabinoid-like system can have something to do with the different personalities. Well, that's a very complicated story, but it may work. I went to a mathematician and told him, look, I believe that there are 8 billion people on this planet, and I believe that there are 8 billion different personalities. Is it possible that the 200 compounds that we have may be involved? He said, of course. There are so many possibilities that the ratios of 10 of these to 10 of others and so on will cause that. This is a crazy speculation, but at some point we'll have to find the biochemical basis of why we are different. Many years ago, when I had an administrative position in my university, I was rector, I was told never give an after-dinner speech before the dinner. And I sincerely apologize for doing so now.
He used to get that from the police, and we used to chop it up in the lab.
It's 555 nanometers, and it's the healthiest for your eyes. This is from cannabis. If you are in the nature green, it's the healthier.
Yes.
It's 555 nanometers.
Popular media is very powerful and very convincing. We should try to go to the basis of these media presentations and be convinced that the facts